"I'm tired of being just a widow," Margaret whispered, her hand trembling against my chest. The October sunroom trapped us in amber light and unspoken want. I'd come to restore her Victorian home. 6 weeks later, we stood at a precipice neither expected, her perfume mixed with my paint-stained clothes. The contrast shouldn't have worked. "You're half my age?" she breathed. "You're sure about this?" I needed her certain. Her kiss was her answer, soft, searching, nothing like the practiced smile from that first morning. When she pulled back, forehead against mine, we both knew tomorrow would be different. But before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. I checked my schedule twice before pulling up to the Victorian home on Cedar Street. 8:15 in the morning, right on time. The October air had that crisp bite that made everything feel more alive somehow. Leaves scattering across the curved driveway as I gathered my portfolio and tablet. I'd done my research on Mrs. Hayes and her renovation request. Of course, 8 months a widow, looking to update several rooms in the historic home she'd inherited. The notes from our phone consultation were professional, precise, just like the manicured landscaping and freshly painted trim I noticed as I approached. The wraparound porch dot when she opened the door. I had to adjust my mental picture. Margaret Hayes wasn't the grief-shadowed figure I'd expected. Her auburn hair caught the morning light, styled in an elegant bob that emphasized her good bones. She wore a sage cashmere sweater and tailored pants, every detail carefully chosen. Her smile was polite, practiced, the kind people perfect when they're tired of others watching for cracks. "You must be the contractor," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming out so early." "James Mitchell, ma'am." "And early is no trouble at all." Her handshake was firm but brief. Maintaining that careful distance, she led me through the foyer, her voice taking on an almost tour guide cadence as she pointed out original woodwork and period details. The house was immaculate, but there was something suspended about it, as if someone had pressed pause on a particular moment in time and walked away. "The living room needs the most work," she explained, gesturing to heavy drapes and dark paneling. "It's rather oppressive in here. I'd like to bring in more light." I made notes, asked the right questions about structural concerns and material preferences, but I kept catching glimpses of something else beneath her composed exterior, little hesitations, moments when her rehearsed script faltered. The kitchen was next. Old gleaming granite and professional-grade appliances that had rarely seen use. Then the formal dining room, where family photos had been meticulously arranged, but seemed to be gathering dust. In each space, Mrs. Hayes maintained that careful distance, that measured tone, until we reached the sunroom. The morning light streamed through wall-to-wall windows, catching dust motes that danced in the amber glow. It was the first room that felt lived in, with a half-empty teacup on the side table and an open book face down on the window seat. "Robert never liked this room," she said, then caught herself, fingers tightening on the doorframe. "He said it was impractical, too hot in summer, too cold in winter." She gave a small laugh that wasn't really a laugh at all. "I suppose it doesn't matter now what he would have wanted?" The vulnerability in that admission hung in the air between us. I watched. Her shoulders tense, waiting for the awkward sympathy she'd probably faced too many times. Instead, I found myself studying the way the light played across her face, the green of her eyes more visible now that she'd let that practiced smile slip. When she turned to face me, something shifted in her expression. Maybe she recognized that I wasn't looking at her with pity, but with genuine curiosity about the person emerging from behind that careful facade. For a moment, we just stood there in the dusty sunlight, the silence stretching into something almost tangible. I wanted to ask her what she wanted for the room, not what her husband would have approved of, but what she'd always imagined it could be. The question was there on the tip of my tongue, but before I could voice it, she straightened her shoulders and that professional mask slipped back into place. Early November brought a different rhythm to the Hayes house. My crew and I settled into a steady workflow, starting with the living room's dark paneling. I'd catch snippets of Margaret, Mrs. Hayes, I reminded myself, moving through her daily routines as we worked. She had a way of appearing in doorways, coffee cup in hand, watching us transform her spaces. At first, she'd offer quick comments about the progress, but those moments began stretching longer. One morning, as I measured crown molding, she lingered in the archway, telling me about the house's original owners from the 19th century. Her voice grew animated, describing the old photographs she'd found in the attic, and I noticed how her hands moved when she was truly engaged in a topic. "I've been reading about Victorian architecture," she said another day, passing me a steaming mug of coffee. Perfect. Just the right amount of cream, no sugar. I couldn't remember telling her how I took it. The craftsmanship back then, they built things to last, didn't they? I found myself timing my breaks differently, catching those quieter moments when she seemed more herself. You can tell a lot about people during renovation projects, how they handle dust and disorder, which spaces hold meaning. Margaret touched certain walls with memory as she passed, trailing fingers along original baseboards or pausing at particular windows. But she never ventured near the master bedroom wing while we were working, taking long detours to avoid it. "Entirely, these built-ins," she said one afternoon, running her hand along the freshly sanded bookshelf edges. I always wanted to fill them with classics I never had time to read. There was that laugh again, not the polite one she used when my crew made small talk, but something softer and more genuine. Seems silly now, doesn't it? All that time spent keeping everything just so. I looked up from my work, caught the way sunlight played across her features. "It's never too late to start reading them." Her smile shifted then, became something more real. "No, I suppose it isn't." Our conversations began weaving between paint samples and progress reports. She'd mention a book she'd finally opened, and I'd share something about restoration techniques I'd learned. Sometimes we'd just stand in comfortable silence, examining the day's work while dust motes danced around us. I started noticing smaller things, how she'd absently twist her wedding ring when deep in thought, the way her accent softened when she was tired, how she'd catch herself if she got too comfortable and pull that careful composure back around her like armor. But those unguarded moments came more frequently, especially during our afternoon check-ins. "The trim color isn't quite right," she said one day, frowning at a test patch. But instead of the usual client critique, she added, "Robert would have hated it anyway. He preferred everything safe." She paused, something vulnerable flickering across her face. "What do you think about the deeper green?" I found myself looking forward to these interludes more than I should have. They were just client interactions. I told myself perfectly normal conversations about renovation details. But there was something about the way she'd gradually unfold, sharing fragments of herself between discussions of hardware finishes and window treatments that made each day feel like unwrapping another layer of mystery. "You know," she said one particularly dusty afternoon, handing me another perfectly perpefi, "I used to be a museum curator." Before, she let the sentence trail off, but her eyes met mine with a directness that made my breath catch. One miss being surrounded by beautiful things with stories to tell. I looked around at the half-finished room, saw it suddenly through her curator's eyes, the potential for beauty, for stories yet to be written. "We're just helping this house tell its next chapter," I said quietly. The smile she gave me then was neither practiced nor polite, but something new entirely. I knew I was treading dangerous ground, feeling this pull toward these moments. She was a client recently widowed, and I was here to do a job. But standing there in the afternoon light, watching her tentatively embrace change, I couldn't help wanting to see more of the person emerging from behind those careful walls. I was doing a final walkthrough after the crew left when I heard it. That distinctive gurgling sound that makes every contractor's heart sink. Before I could pinpoint the source, Margaret's voice rang out from upstairs. "Oh, no, no, no." I took the stairs 2 at a time, following the sound of splashing and muffled distress to the master bathroom. The sight stopped me in the doorway. Margaret Hayes on her knees in spreading water, desperately trying to gather floating papers and photographs. "The pipe just burst," she said, not looking up. Her voice had that forced steadiness I recognized from our first meeting. "I'll call a plumber. You should go home. It's late." But I was already rolling up my sleeves, phone in hand. Let me shut off the water first. Then we'll save what we can. The main valve took just minutes to locate and close, but in that time, the water had seeped under the bathroom door and into the master bedroom. Margaret stood in the doorway, hands pressed to her mouth, as more items emerged from under the bed, photo albums, old letters, boxes of memories she probably hadn't touched since her husband died. I should have moved these months ago, she whispered. I just couldn't. Here, I said softly, handing her a stack of clean towels from the linen closet. We'll start with the photographs. They're the most vulnerable. We worked in silence at first, carefully separating stuck pages and laying precious memories out to dry. The bathroom floor became an archive of Margaret's married life, vacation snapshots, anniversary cards, ticket stubs from concerts and plays. She began speaking quietly as we worked, telling me stories about each piece we salvaged. This was Tuscany, 1997, she said, carefully dabbing a photo with a soft towel. Robert insisted on wearing these horrible sandals with socks the entire trip. The locals were horrified. Her fingers traced the image's edge. He never cared what anyone thought. I glanced at the photo and couldn't help myself. Those are some impressively high socks for an Italian summer. The laugh that burst from Margaret startled us both. Genuine, unguarded, almost musical. Nothing like her usual careful chuckles. She clapped a hand over her mouth, eyes wide, but couldn't quite contain her giggles. They really were awful, she managed, shoulders shaking. He had them in 3 colors. Something shifted in the room's atmosphere. As we continued working through the soggy mementos, Margaret's stories became more relaxed, more real. She told me about their first apartment with its leaning bookshelf and temperamental radiator. About the disastrous dinner party where Robert burned the roast but charmed everyone with takeout pizza and expensive wine. The night deepened around us, but neither mentioned stopping. I brought up lamps from the renovation supplies, creating pools of warm light in which we worked. The intimacy of the moment wasn't lost on me, kneeling beside her on the floor, watching her rediscover these pieces of her past without the heavy mantle of grief she usually wore. Look at this, she said, holding up another photo. Our first house. Robert hated the yellow paint, but I loved it. We compromised on everything else, but I wouldn't budge on that sunny kitchen. Her voice had changed over the hours we'd been working. No trace of that performed composure remained. This was Margaret as she must have been before Loss rewrote. Her story, animated, witty, unafraid to claim her opinions. You can tell it made the room, I said, examining the photo. Sometimes the best choices are the bold ones. She looked up at me then, something vulnerable and questioning in her expression. The lamplight caught the silver threads in her hair, the laugh lines around her eyes that had been earned by happier times. For a moment, we were just 2 people sharing stories in the quiet hours. All our usual boundaries softened by water damage and midnight confessions. A drop of water fell from somewhere above, breaking the spell. Margaret cleared her throat, looking around at the photographs drying on every surface. I can't believe how much we salvage, she said quietly. When I saw the water, I thought I was losing it all again. The kitchen seemed warmer, somehow, as we carried the salvaged photographs downstairs. Margaret cleared space on the oak table, pushing aside a stack of renovation magazines I'd left there earlier in the week. We began laying out the photos in neat rows, a timeline of memories still slightly damp but intact. I never meant to keep everything boxed up there, Margaret said, smoothing the corner of a black and white print. After Robert died, people kept telling me to take my time sorting through things. Don't rush the process, they'd say, as if grief runs on some kind of schedule. I nodded, carefully arranging another row of photos. The kitchen's pendant light cast a gentle glow over the table, warming the silver in Margaret's hair. The thing is, she continued, her hands busy with the sorting, everyone treats me like I might break apart any second. They lower their voices, give me these careful looks. Even my closest friends seem to be waiting for, I don't know, some kind of breakdown. She paused, picking up a photograph of what looked like a garden party. The worst are the people who start sentences with at least, At least you had 23 good years. At least he didn't suffer. As if that somehow makes it, her voice trailed off. I kept working, giving her space to find her words. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is just listen. 8 months, she said quietly. 8 months of casseroles and sympathy cards and people speaking to me in funeral voices. 8 months of being poor Margaret instead of just Margaret. My hands stayed steady with the photographs, but I felt the weight of her words. I'd seen hints of this frustration in our daily interactions. The way she'd straighten her spine when visitors came to check on renovation progress, the practiced smile she'd wear like armor. You know what's strange? She glanced up at me. You're the first person who just talks to me. No tiptoeing, no worried looks. Just normal conversations about books and paint colors and, yes, even my husband's questionable taste in footwear. A small smile tugged at her lips, echoing our earlier laughter over those vacation photos. I found myself wanting to preserve that lightness in her expression. Well, I said, those sandals were a crime against Italian fashion. Someone had to acknowledge it. Her quiet laugh felt like a gift in the late-night kitchen. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, creating neat stacks of photographs. Christmas mornings, summer barbecues, ordinary moments that have become precious through loss. We reached for the same photograph, a sunset shot from what looked like a beach vacation. Our fingers brushed and something electric sparked in that simple contact. Neither of us pulled away immediately. Her hand was warm beneath mine, and I could feel her pulse through that single point of connection. Time seemed to slow in that moment. The kitchen's soft light, the scattered photographs, the lingering touch, everything felt heightened and significant. When I finally looked up, Margaret's eyes held questions I wasn't sure either of us was ready to voice. I carefully lifted the photograph, our fingers sliding apart with deliberate slowness. The charge remained in the air between us as we continued sorting. Our movements more measured now, more aware of each other's presence. The easy conversation of before had given way to something deeper, a shared understanding that boundaries had shifted. We worked in companionable silence, but I felt every accidental brush of hands, every shared glance with new intensity. When the last photograph was sorted, Margaret walked me to the front door. The house was dark except for the kitchen light spilling into the hallway. She touched my arm as I reached for the doorknob, her fingers light but certain. "Thank you," she said softly, "for staying, for helping, for—" She didn't finish, but her hand lingered on my arm, saying what words couldn't. I nodded, understanding everything she wasn't quite ready to express. As I stepped onto the porch, I knew tomorrow would be different. The careful distance we'd maintained was changing into something else, something neither of us had expected, but couldn't quite deny. December crept in with early sunsets and crystalline air that promised snow. The renovation was proceeding on schedule, but something else had shifted alongside the changing season. Margaret stopped pretending to check on the work progress. Instead, she began appearing in doorways after my crew left, usually with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses that caught the fading light. I accepted these quiet invitations, telling myself it was just friendly conversation between a contractor and client. But there was nothing typical about the way we gravitated to the sunroom. Each evening, where sawdust still sparkled in shafts of winter light and drop cloths draped like fresh snow over the furniture. "I've been thinking about what this space could be," Margaret said one evening, swirling her wine thoughtfully. "Not just aesthetically, but what it means." She walked to the windows, her silhouette backlit by the purple dusk. "Robert never came in here. He called it impractical, too cold in winter, too hot in summer, but I always saw something different." I set down my paintbrush, giving her my full attention. The room was already transforming under our shared vision, her ideas, my hands bringing them to life. New insulation, restored window seats, carefully matched crown molding that honored the home's Victorian bones while creating something fresh. "You know what it's like?" she continued, turning back to face me. "Being the widow becomes your whole identity. People look at you and that's all they see. I've spent so long being careful of others' feelings I almost forgot what my own dreams looked like." The confession hung in the air between us. I stayed quiet, sensing she needed space to unfold these thoughts she'd kept wrapped tight for so long. I wanted to write books, she said softly. Travel essays, actually. I have notebooks full of half-started stories from the few trips we took. Robert always said there would be time for that later, after his career was established. She gave a small, rueful laugh. I let myself believe that too. Moving to the window seat we'd just finished, Margaret ran her hand along the fresh paint. There were so many places I wanted to see, the Greek islands in spring, the Scottish highlands when the heather blooms, small villages in Japan during cherry blossom season. She paused, fingers trailing over the woodwork. Funny how you can love someone and still set aside pieces of yourself, thinking there will always be time to pick them up later. What's stopping you now? I asked, keeping my voice gentle. She looked at me then, really looked as if seeing past our usual roles. Fear, maybe, habit. It's easier to stay in the shape you've worn for so long, even when it doesn't fit anymore. I understood something about that. Setting down my tools, I told her about my own path, how I'd left a promising architecture career to work with my hands instead. There's something honest about restoration, I explained. These old houses, they hold stories in their bones. They don't need to be completely transformed, just remembered, renewed, given space to be what they always were. Margaret's smile held a warmth I was coming to crave. We worked side by side as darkness gathered outside, painting trim by lamplight. The soft glow created an intimate bubble around us, making the rest of the world feel distant and unimportant. When snow began falling outside the windows, fat flakes catching the light, Margaret stood back to admire our progress. Something in her posture had changed, a straightening of the spine, a lift of the chin. She wasn't performing grief anymore, wasn't trying to be what others needed. In that moment I saw her clearly, not as a client, not as a widow, but as a woman rediscovering her own shape, her own dreams. It's beautiful, she said, but she wasn't looking at the room. The space between us felt charged with possibility, like the air before a storm. Outside, the snow continued to fall, wrapping the house in silence and turning the sunroom into our private world. The snow fell heavier now, muffling the world beyond the sunroom's windows. Margaret stood near me, close enough that I caught the subtle notes of her perfume, something sophisticated and warm that made me suddenly self-conscious of my paint-stained clothes and the sawdust in my hair. The contrast between us felt stark in that moment, her elegant sweater against my worn work shirt, her manicured hands beside my calloused ones. You know what exhausts me most? She asked, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The lamplight caught the silver threads in her auburn hair, making them shimmer. It's not even the grief anymore, it's the performance of it. I set down my paintbrush, giving her my complete attention. There was something different in her tone tonight, something raw and honest that made my pulse quicken. People see the widow before they see me, she continued, wrapping her arms around herself. They tiptoe around anything that might suggest I'm still alive, still capable of wanting things. Her green eyes met mine, holding a weight of unspoken meaning, of feeling things. The confession hung in the air between us, heavy with possibility. I opened my mouth to respond, to say something appropriate about time and healing, but before I could form the words, Margaret moved closer. Her hand came to rest against my chest, tentative but deliberate. I could feel the slight tremor in her. Fingers through my shirt. I know this is inappropriate, she said softly, not moving her hand. You work for me. You're half my age. A small, self-deprecating laugh escaped her. I should be mortified even thinking about this. My heart hammered against her palm. I wondered if she could feel it, this physical betrayal of my composure. The professional part of my brain screamed at me to step back, to maintain boundaries, to remember my role. But I remained still, caught in the gravity of this moment. But I haven't felt this alive in years, Margaret admitted, her voice barely audible above the silence of falling snow. When you look at me, you see me. Not Robert's widow, not some fragile thing that might shatter. Her other hand came up to rest against my cheek, and the touch sent electricity down my spine. You see me?" The honesty in her voice undid me. This wasn't a game or a passing fancy. This was Margaret Hayes, intelligent, cultured, complicated. Margaret laying her truth bare in the golden lamplight of her sunroom. Her eyes held a question that had nothing to do with social propriety and everything to do with desire. With the raw human need to be seen and wanted. Time seemed to stretch like honey, thick and sweet and dangerous. We stood at the edge of something. Momentous, both knowing that whatever happened next would change everything. There would be no going back to contractor and client, no pretending this was just about renovating a house. Margaret's thumb brushed ever so slightly against my cheek, and I fought to keep my breathing steady. The space between us had shrunk to almost nothing, yet neither of us moved to close that final distance. We balanced there in that exquisite moment of possibility, where anything could happen but nothing had to happen. The snow continued to fall outside, wrapping us in a cocoon of white silence. Margaret's perfume mingled with the scent of fresh paint and old wood, creating something new and intoxicating. Her hand remained steady against my chest, as if she could read every thought through the rhythm of my heartbeat. We stood there, poised. On that precipice, while the world held its breath around us, I caught Margaret's hand against my chest, pressing it there gently. Her palm was warm through my shirt, and I wanted her to feel how my heart raced beneath her touch. Wanted her to understand that she affected me just as deeply as I seemed to affect her. "Before anything else," I said softly, "I need to know. This is what you really want." The words came out hoarser than I intended, betraying how much this moment meant. Not as an escape, not as proof you can still feel something, but because you want. I hesitated, then finished, "This, us." Margaret's green eyes searched my face, and I saw the moment she understood what I was offering, not just a kiss or a moment of connection, but a choice. A real choice with all its complications and consequences laid bare. Her fingers curled slightly against my chest. "You're giving me an out," she whispered, something like wonder in her voice. "Even now." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The lamplight caught the silver in her hair, making her glow like something precious and rare. God, she was beautiful. When she wasn't hiding behind that careful widow's mask, Margaret took a small step closer, erasing what little space remained between us. Her other hand still rested against my cheek, and now her thumb traced a gentle line along my jaw. The touch sent shivers down my spine. Her answer came not in words, but in the soft press of her lips against mine. The kiss was nothing like I had imagined. And yes, I had imagined it in quiet moments I tried not to think about. It was tentative. At first, almost questioning, like she was learning the shape of this new reality. Her lips were soft, carrying just a hint of the wine we'd shared earlier. Then something shifted. Margaret made a small sound in the back of her throat, and suddenly, we were both leaning in, deepening the kiss. My free hand found her waist, steadying her, or maybe steadying myself. Her fingers slid from my cheek into my hair, and the gentle scrape of her nails against my scalp nearly undid me when we finally broke apart. Margaret rested her forehead against mine. We both breathed unsteadily in the quiet room, the snow still, falling silent outside our window. Our window, when had I started thinking of it that way? The reality of what we'd just done settled over us like a physical weight. Tomorrow I would still be her contractor. She would still be my client, still be navigating her grief and her place in this community. We'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Margaret pulled back slightly, though not completely away. I saw no regret in her eyes, but there was a new awareness there, a recognition of just how much had changed in the space of a single kiss. "We should," she started, then paused to take a shaky breath. Her hand was still pressed against my chest, like she couldn't quite bring herself to break that point of contact. "We should think about this. Really think about it." "Yeah," I agreed, though every instinct screamed to pull her. "Close again?" "You're right," she nodded, more to herself than to me. I don't want this to be something we rush into and regret. There's too much at stake." "I know." I covered her hand with mine where it rested over my heart, giving it a gentle squeeze. "We'll take time. Figure things out?" But we both knew, standing there in the golden light of her sunroom, that something fundamental had shifted between us. That kiss hadn't just been desire or curiosity or lonely heart seeking comfort. It had been recognition of each other, of possibilities we hadn't dared voice before. The snow continued falling outside, wrapping us in its quiet stillness. Margaret's perfume lingered in the air, mixing with paint and sawdust to create a scent I knew would haunt my dreams. We stood there, neither quite ready to step away, both understanding that whatever happened next would reshape both our worlds. I couldn't focus worth a damn the next day. Every time I picked up a tool, my mind wandered back to that kiss in the sunroom, the weight of Margaret's hand against my chest. The way she'd whispered about taking time to think. My crew definitely noticed something was off. I caught Mike giving me concerned looks when I measured the same doorframe 3 times, getting different numbers each time. Even Tom, who usually kept to himself, asked if I was feeling all right. I mumbled something about not sleeping well and buried myself in work. Margaret kept her distance, which was probably smart. I caught glimpses of her through windows and doorways as she moved through the house, but she didn't stop by with coffee or renovation questions. The space felt necessary but tortuous. Every time I heard footsteps, my heart jumped. Late afternoon, my phone buzzed. Margaret's name lit up the screen, and my stomach did that swooping thing I'd been trying to ignore for weeks. "Would you like to have dinner with me tonight?" The text was simple, direct. Then a second message appeared. Not as my contractor, just as Nathan. That distinction hit me right in the chest. Just Nathan? Not the guy fixing her house or the professional she'd hired, but me. I texted back before I could overthink it. "I'd love to." She responded with a time and added, "Casual dress is fine," which meant she'd thought about what I might worry about. It made me smile. I went home to shower and change, trying not to read too much into every detail. But when I arrived back at her house that evening, it was clear Margaret had put thought into every aspect of this dinner. The formal dining room I'd helped restore was transformed. Candlelight danced across the deep blue walls, making the gold-leafed details we preserved shimmer. The table was set for 2 with what looked like her best china. And Margaret, she wore a dress I hadn't seen before, deep green that brought out her eyes. Her silver-streaked hair caught the candlelight in a way that made my breath catch. But what struck me most was how nervous she seemed adjusting a fork that was already perfectly aligned, smoothing her dress with slightly trembling hands. "You look beautiful," I said softly, and her shoulders relaxed just a fraction. "Thank you," she gestured to the table with a small smile. "I hope you're hungry. I might have gone a bit overboard." We sat across from each other, and Margaret poured wine into delicate glasses. The first course was some kind of soup that smelled amazing, but I noticed her hands shaking slightly as she served it. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble," I said gently. "I wanted to." She set the soup tureen down and met my eyes. Though I should confess I haven't done this in 23 years, the weight of that statement hung between us. She meant more than just hosting a formal dinner, and we both knew it. "We can take this as slow as you need," I told her, meaning every word. "I'm not going anywhere." Something in her expression softened. Thank you for understanding." The tension eased after that. We talked about everything and nothing books. We loved, places we wanted to see, stories from our pasts. Margaret told me about her first museum job, her eyes lighting up as she described cataloging ancient artifacts. I shared memories of learning carpentry from my grandfather, making her laugh with tales of my early disasters. As the courses progressed, Margaret really had gone all out. I watched her relax into the evening. Her movements became more fluid, her laughter more frequent. When she reached across the table to refill my wine, her fingers brushed mine deliberately. "This is nice," she said softly, "being here with you like this." "No pretenses. It is." I caught her hand before she could withdraw it completely. "And for the record, the food is amazing." Her smile was radiant. "Well, I had to impress you somehow. Since you've already seen me covered in dust and plaster." "Trust me," I said, running my thumb across her knuckles. "You've never needed to try to impress me." A faint blush colored her cheeks, and she didn't pull her hand away. We sat there, connected by that simple touch, both aware of the choice we were making. Not just about tonight, but about everything that might come after. After the last bite of dessert, Margaret stood and extended her hand to me. Her eyes held mine with quiet certainty that made my pulse quicken. I took her hand, letting her guide me from the dining room toward the grand staircase we'd restored together. Each step upward felt deliberate, Margaret leading with growing confidence. The wood beneath our feet was smooth. We'd spent days refinishing these treads. Now they carried us toward something entirely different than renovation work. At the landing, Margaret paused. Moonlight filtered through the restored stained glass window, casting soft colors across her face as she turned to look at me. The hesitation I'd seen earlier was gone, replaced by something steady and sure. Her fingers tightened gently around mine as we continued up to the second floor. The hallway felt different in the evening shadows. Margaret's hand was warm in mine as she led me toward her bedroom. At the door, she turned to face me fully, her expression open and clear. "I choose this," she said softly, each word carrying weight and intention. This wasn't grief or rebellion. Speaking, this was Margaret knowing exactly what she wanted. I saw her then. Truly saw her not as my client or an older woman, but as Margaret. Complex, beautiful, and choosing me. Her free hand reached behind her, turning the doorknob, an invitation. A promise. Inside Margaret's bedroom, moonlight spilled across the Persian rug as we stood facing each other. I let her set the pace, watching as she processed the moment. Her eyes held mine, a mix of nervousness and certainty dancing in their depths. She stepped closer, her hands reaching up to trace my face with wondering fingers. "It's been so long since," she whispered, then found my lips with hers. This kiss was different, deeper, unhurried, full of discovery. We took our time, learning the language of each other's responses. Between kisses, Margaret's whispers painted her truth against my skin. "I'd forgotten what it feels like," she breathed, "to be wanted like this." Her hands trembled slightly as they found the buttons of my shirt. "Everything about this feels so different, so right." "You're beautiful," I murmured back, finally, voicing what I'd been holding in for weeks. "I've wanted this, wanted you." We moved together toward her bed, clothes becoming gentle obstacles in our path. The night unfolded in careful exploration and reverent touches, each discovery celebrated in soft gasps and tender words. When we finally came together fully, it transcended the physical two souls finding each other across all the reasons we shouldn't. Choosing connection over convention. I woke to the soft whisper of snow against glass and found Margaret's side of the bed empty. She stood at the window, wrapped in a white sheet, her silhouette ethereal in the pre-dawn light. Something had shifted in her bearing, a piece I hadn't seen before, making her look younger, unburdened. Our eyes met in the reflection, and without a word we dressed quietly. The path to the sunroom felt natural, like muscle memory built over months of shared evenings. While Margaret disappeared to make coffee, I knelt to light the space heater we'd installed during the renovation, one of many small changes we'd made to this room. Steam rose from the mugs as we settled onto the floor cushions, sharing throw blankets against the December chill. The sunrise painted everything in amber and gold, catching in Margaret's hair as she leaned against my chest. Neither of us spoke about what came next. Some moments deserve to exist untouched by tomorrows. Questions. I watched as Margaret reached for her notebook, the one I'd seen her writing in during quiet evenings, recording memories of her past life, but today was different. Instead of looking back, her pen moved with purpose, sketching plans, making lists that pointed forward. When I saw what she was doing, I pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. The sunlight painted long rectangles across the floor as we sat facing each other. Margaret's notebook between us. Her fingers traced the edge of a blank page. And I marveled at how natural this felt, discussing our future on the morning after everything changed. "My friends will have opinions," she said, a wry smile playing at her lips. "A 50-year-old widow dating her 28-year-old contractor? It's hardly subtle." I reached across the notebook to take her hand. "My crew's already noticed something. They're professional, but word will get around. Some clients might not like it." Does that worry you? Her green eyes searched mine, less than you'd think. I squeezed her fingers. We can finish the renovation properly, keep things professional during work hours. After that, we take our time? Margaret suggested. Give people a chance to see us as us. Exactly. I watched her make notes in her elegant handwriting, practical steps, dates, considerations. Look at you, planning our future with that organized mind of yours. She laughed, the sound bright and real. If someone had told me last year I'd be plotting a relationship timeline with a contractor half my age, she shook her head. Life has strange ways of surprising us. You've surprised me too, I admitted. Showed me what real strength looks like. How to rebuild after loss. Margaret set down her pen and leaned forward, kissing me softly in the morning light. Outside, snow continued falling, blanketing the world in possibility. The pages between? U.S. weren't blank spaces to fear anymore. They were chapters waiting to be written. We'll figure it out, she whispered against my lips. Together. If this chapter felt like it was meant for you, subscribe and ring the bell. Tomorrow's may be the hand you didn't know you were reaching for.